Hello, friends. Sometimes one small act of kindness can completely change a person's destiny. Today, I will tell you an amazing story about an ordinary guy, Robert Chambers, from the small English town of Preston. It will be interesting, so watch until the end. Robert was an ordinary person who was like everyone else in his town. He worked as a regular average office clerk and got an average salary and never really stood out. He got along well with his colleagues, and they knew him as a decent, kind, and nice person. He performed his work quite well. He did not have conflicts with his superiors, was never late, and often stayed late after work if he did not finish it on time. That is why what happened later shocked him. He could never have expected this to happen to him. One morning, his boss invited him to his office, where he accused him of giving information to others behind his back. Robert was at a loss because he had worked for this company for several years, and over the years he had never even allowed himself to think about such a scheme. Of course, he began to defend himself in every possible way and say that this was not true. He would never have done anything like this in his life, but the boss was relentless. He shouted at Robert, showed some pieces of paper, and at the end said in a calm, dry voice that Robert was fired. So in one morning, his whole life was destroyed. He realized that if he did not find another job in the near future, he would be evicted from his rented apartment, and he would end up on the street homeless without the opportunity to clean himself or cook for himself. Everything that was happening seemed to him a terrible nightmare. But all his attempts to find a new job were unsuccessful. It turned out that his former boss blacklisted Robert, and now no one, even the smallest company, would hire him. The apartment had to be abandoned, and poor Robert found himself on the street. There are no words to convey how much his life changed after that. He often had to spend the night in free hostels and eat what he could find on the street or ask for leftovers from local restaurants. His appearance was already completely different from the former Robert. He did not have the opportunity to take care of himself or wash his things. His old clothes became worn out very quickly, and he did not have the opportunity to buy new clothes. People just passed by him. Every day it was harder for him to find food for himself. But the main thing was that he managed to preserve his best inner qualities: kindness, honesty, and faith in people. After all, it was they who helped him one night. A turning point in his life happened after one meeting, although that evening he could not even imagine it. One night, Robert was walking around the city looking for food and lodging when he saw a tear-stained young girl who was sitting alone in the street, and she looked very upset. He decided to go up to her and find out what happened to her. Of course, the sight of the approaching unwashed and disheveled stranger frightened her, but Robert said at once that he was not dangerous and he only wanted to talk to her. Either his kind eyes did their job, or because of her despair, the stranger decided to speak to Robert, so they met. Her name was Dominique, and she studied at the University of Central Lancashire, recently celebrated her 22nd birthday, and that day she had just had a force majeure. She lost her bank card and now had no opportunity to go home. Robert felt sincerely sorry for the young girl who had to sit like this on the street, where, by the way, it was not safe. He started looking for some money in his pockets and collected a total of about £3 that he was going to spend on food. But looking at the hopelessness of the girl, his appetite disappeared, and he decided to give this money to her to take a taxi home. He stopped a taxi and helped his new friend get in and sent her home to the neighboring town of Lancashire. Upon arriving home, Dominique realized how kind-hearted Robert turned out to be because he gave his last money to help her. She thought for a long time about his act, and the next day she decided to find Robert and help him in return. On the way to where they had met yesterday, Dominique bought some food, put £20 in a bag, and went to look for him. But she did not find Robert that day. She walked around the city for several days looking for Robert and asking about him, and fortunately, she found him on the third day. He was sitting right on the ground near a tree and eating a piece of stale bread. Dominique went up to him and started a conversation with him. She was surprised at how educated and polite Robert was, and most importantly, he was very modest. He did not want to take her £20, justifying this by the fact that any decent person wouldn't do that. But we know that not everyone, even a very well-to-do person, will approach a person in need on the street and give his last money away. On that day, they talked for a long time, and Robert said that he had lived on the street for 7 months, but every day he started with the hope that one day he would find himself a decent job, rent an apartment, and live a normal life. They said goodbye on a friendly note, but deep down in her soul, Dominique had a deep sadness. She felt sorry for the unfortunate Robert that she decided at all costs to help him in some way. When the girl came home, she posted on her Twitter page a detailed story about Robert Chambers and urged her friends to give £3 each. This small amount was very symbolic because that was how much Robert took out of his pockets and gave his last money to her to go home. Dominique's goal was to raise at least £500 to help Robert rent a house for the first month and buy the necessary things for living. To her surprise, in several minutes, thousands of people retweeted her post and the account started increasing at high speed. People from all over the world were sending money, and the biggest luck was that this post was retweeted by a very large charity organization, and Robert's account accumulated in a short time an incredible sum, £20,000. In addition, the media drew attention to the story of Dominique and Robert. Journalists came to the girl with a request to tell them this story in more detail. Dominique said that she herself did not expect such an influx of people who wanted to help Robert, that the fundraising site at times could not even stand it and stopped working because a lot of people were simultaneously trying to transfer money to help him. But the most important thing in the story at that time was that Robert himself still had no idea that he had already become a local celebrity. Dominique had not yet had time to tell him the good news and was just about to do it. When she handed Robert a check for £20,000, he was stunned by surprise. He could not believe what was happening. With shaking hands, he picked up the check and started crying. His tears melted the hearts of everyone that day. He was sincerely happy and thanked Dominique. He said that no one had ever done so much for him in his whole life, and he could not even think that someone would do such a thing for him. From that day on, Robert's life finally changed for the better. He was able to rent an apartment, throw his shabby things away, and buy himself new clothes. He even bought himself a second-hand car to be able to drive to his new job, which people also helped him find. But the story of the good guy Robert does not end there. After all the purchases he needed, he took the rest of the amount, and there was still quite a big amount left, and bought food and clothes with all his money and gave it to homeless people, to those who until recently shared their last bread and shelter with him, to those who were looked at by indifferent people from the windows of their cars, to those who most often, not of their own free will, but by the will of fate, find themselves on the street. You may think, it seems that this will certainly never happen to me, but imagine for a moment having lost your job and the ability to pay your bills and loans, pay for housing and food, and not having loved ones who can help in difficult times. What would you do in that case? Any sane person almost 100% of the time will not voluntarily leave their cozy home and start living on the street, and therefore every homeless person has a sad story behind them. And so, having the opportunity to help, we must help each other, be kind to each other, and then the world around will become kind. And perhaps another homeless man will find his happiness, as Robert Chambers found it thanks to one wonderful, caring girl, Dominique, with whom they became good friends and, by the way, are still friends. What do you think about this story? What would you do if you were Dominique? Write your opinion in the comments, like and subscribe to the channel.